views expressed on this program are those of the hosts, guests, and callers, and are not necessarily those of this station, its management, or other advertisers. You're listening to Transformation Talk Radio.
This show's audio was via a Skype call.
Get fired up for Spirit Fire Radio with your hosts, Dorothy Riddle and Steve Kramer. Get ready to shine the light on universal spiritual principles and uncover ways that ageless wisdom can guide you in cultivating consciousness in these modern times. Bring purpose to your life through practical spirituality and add to your awareness with Spirit Fire Radio. Now, here are your hosts, Dorothy Riddle and Steve Kramer.
Hello, listeners. Welcome to Spirit Fire Radio. My name is Steve Kramer, and I am joined by my co-host, Dr. Dorothy Riddle. Hi, Dorothy.
Hi, Steve.
Great to be with you, and listeners, great to be with you. We are going to continue this month-long conversation on the energy of the will. Today, we're going to talk about the ethics of using will energy. This is a powerful force. The willpower, those two words go together. And so anytime we've got a force at play, it is going to create results. You know, it is going to have a cause, and there is an intention, and that will have its effect. So we want to make sure that when we're using this force, that it is used for good. So we're going to discuss goodwill today and aligning our actions with a moral compass. Dorothy, would you like to start the show off perhaps with a quote?
I'd love to. Actually, today I have two from Mahatma Gandhi. The first is, to believe in something and not to live it is dishonest. And the second is, it's easy to stand in the crowd, but it takes courage to stand alone. And to me, both of these get at, the whole issue of alignment between our belief in the common good and then how we actually manifest that, how we actually behave in our use of the will energy.
And the necessity to behave in such a way that actually brings about change, that to say that it's just your belief, but yet your actions show otherwise, or you're not applying will to seeing that those beliefs help create the world, that you've got to apply the will there, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And you mentioned moral compass in your intro, Steve. I just would like to remind our listeners of what we mean when we use the word moral compass. It's an internalized set of values and objectives that guide us with regard to our ethical behavior and decision-making. And one of the concerns that we've referenced a number of times on this show, and that is also in the public discussions, is that constant violation of ethics can erode our contact with, our sense of a moral compass, and there seem to be a lot of immoral or amoral actions taking place. So consciously being aware of our moral compass and strengthening it is really, really critical.
For sure, and being aware when our moral compass is slowly losing its true north. I think of these really violent video games and the way they've sort of chipped away at what we consider to be right action, that even though you're sitting in front of a TV and the gun is actually on a little PlayStation, piece, that you're still really contributing to a really violent act, and on some level it is chipping away at your sense of right and how you use your energy. Is it actually a destructive force? And being aware of the ways in which we're exposed to immorality or unethical behavior, and it becomes the norm. So it's really important for us to actually use the will as a way of aligning our moral compass to make sure that really our thoughts and actions and what we're taking in and what we're putting out really is for the greater good and has got some benefit for us all.
Yeah, and I think of it, Steve, as remembering that every choice that we make builds our reflexive repertoire, if you will. So if every time I see a particular person, I think a negative thought about them or a critical thought about them, then I will just fall into that way of thinking when I encounter them, or it will start to generalize to other people. So being aware that it's like an inner fiber that we are either strengthening or weakening with each of our choices about how we focus and use will energy. If we will be aware of focusing in a way that is intentionally in line with the common good, that is intentionally looking for ways to support and strengthen and empower those around us who need that kind of help. If we think always in ways that assume the best, but are aware that the best is not always what's happening, then we strengthen that moral compass. We strengthen that ability to be pointed true north, as you were saying, as we act. And every time we don't do that, we gradually weaken that fiber in ourselves.
I think of that quote, idle hands are the devil's workshop. It's like you've really got to apply it. It's got to be a part of your day today. It really comes down to right use of energy. How do I use my energy? What am I creating? We've said many times, energy follows thoughts, that we participate in creating our own reality. And so really it is our human doingness that creates our own human beingness. I think when we think of will energy, and as you said, that the greater good, that's where this comes together to be goodwill. So it's really using that energy of will for the greater good and aligning oneself with the energy of goodwill.
Well, and I'd like to link it back to what we have mentioned a number of times on this show, and that is we live in a probabilistic universe. Things are not predetermined. Every choice that we make tips the scales one way or another, so to speak. And so there's a positive to that. I mean, that's exciting that anything is possible. Some of those options may have a very, very low probability of occurring without a lot of effort, but they are possible. And so with every choice that we make, we are saying what we want this universe to be, what we want our experience to be. We are playing an active role in creating our reality.
So being the change you'd like to see in the world, but I also think coming back to this idea of inclusive social action and this idea of expanding and including, that sometimes, it takes a bit of will energy to move outside of perhaps our own very tidy life. Like some of us perhaps live in our own sort of the periphery of our world looks pretty good and it looks could appear to be stable, but there are plenty of people out there, and there are plenty of people in need. And so it's also using that will energy to expand and include those who may not be in the same standing as you. And I think of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. When you read through that, and I have sometimes looked and said, oh, I'm pretty blessed. I have got many of my personal rights are secure. But goodness, you look out at humanity and you realize that there is work to be done. And it's using that will energy and one's moral compass to ensure that everybody's got that quality of life and is leading a life with dignity and one in which they are respected.
Absolutely. And, I think we can think of different levels of this. We have our own energetic field. We need to be alert to what we allow into that energetic field. Do we allow in idle gossip, idle critical gossip? Do we allow in violence, images of violence? So what is it? What is the energy field that we are creating with our own will? And then expanding our awareness. This is the inclusivity, right, Steve? Expanding our awareness beyond ourselves, beyond our very small circle of friends and family, out in terms of what's happening for everybody else, paying attention to declarations that are being made, actions that are being taken, comments that are being made about groups of people, and then our own response to that. Sometimes we can take actual action. Sometimes it's a matter of that we can only take an internal action and say, this is not okay. No, I don't agree with that. So that we don't become numb to the harm that is being created around us.
Well, and it comes back again to this idea of will and free will, that what makes us unique as human beings is this capacity to make choices for ourselves and make choices on behalf of others, which is to say no. So it comes with a responsibility, the ability to respond. So how do I respond? Do I apply my will when I see that I need to respond to a situation? And so always remembering that we've got free will, and how do we use that? What choices do we make in contributing to the greater good? Dorothy, we are at our first break. So listeners, we'll be right back after these messages.
Tune in to The Truth is Funny with Colette Steffen each Wednesday at 8 a.m. Pacific, 11 a.m. Eastern on TransformationTalkRadio.com. This hit show will have you thinking outside the box and riding the wave of infinite potential. Join Colette on the Higher Self Network, inspiring listeners to shine their brilliance and ensure success while roaring with laughter as they recognize the humor of the giant cosmic joke. Visit thetruthisfunny.com.
What if your body and mind were the compasses to the secrets, mysteries, and magic of life? Glenna Rice, co-host of The Questionable Parent, is inviting you to access all that is possible. Glenna is a 10-year certified veteran access consciousness facilitator who offers an amazing variety of life-changing classes and workshops. Work with Glenna from anywhere with teleclasses and workshops all over the globe. To learn more and see Glenna's current schedule of events, classes, and workshops, visit glennarice.com.
Welcome back to Spirit Fire Radio. Speaking of which, Spirit Fire Radio is a collaboration between two organizations, between the School for Esoteric Studies and Spirit Fire. And Dorothy and I are here on behalf of each one of those organizations. And I wondered, Dorothy, if you wouldn't tell our listeners a bit about the School for Esoteric Studies.
Yes, listeners, the School for Esoteric Studies is an educational nonprofit. We provide training to persons with a spiritual practice that they wish to deepen. And you can find out more about that training that we offer at esotericstudies.net. We also have a number of initiatives that we invite you to join us in. One of them we've been mentioning is the inclusive social action. You'll find on our website at esotericstudies.net a series of white papers on the need for inclusive social action, which is the intentionally taking a stand to say no to actions that are harming ourselves or others. So I think of this as tough love on a societal basis. How do we do that compassionately in a way that does not further escalate the violence that's being perpetrated? So that's one of the initiatives that we have underway. We welcome your input, your any thoughts that you have about how we can further implement this concept of inclusive social action. And again, that's at esotericstudies.net.
Beautiful. And Spirit Fire is an educational nonprofit, and we are committed to educating people on the importance of spirituality and showing them ways that they can integrate that spirituality into their everyday lives. One way we find to be incredibly helpful is through meditation, as well as study and service. But meditation, we've got our own meditation practice called the Practice of Living Awareness, and we offer that as a free program online with guided meditations offered every week and on weekends. We've got a meditation center in Western Massachusetts where we support that practice with living awareness retreats. We do that throughout the year, wonderful silent retreats in the summer. And the practice is online now. You can find out more about that at spiritfire.com under the meditation tab, and also about our retreat center in Western Mass. We've also got educational programming as well on spiritfire.com. Dorothy, to continue the conversation, we were speaking before the break about the moral compass, and you have mentioned before from the Ageless Wisdom these three characteristics of generating a value system. I wondered if is that coming to mind?
Well, are you talking about harmlessness, willingness to let others serve as seems best to them, and joy?
That's what I was trying to get you to bring forward, because I think those are so important in terms of establishing the moral compass, and especially that middle one, a willingness to let others serve as seems best to them.
Yeah, it's really interesting to me, Steve, that in the Ageless Wisdom writings, one of the issues that is raised over and over again is the negative impact of criticism. Now, I want to differentiate that from feedback that people have requested. I'm talking about unsolicited criticism, unsolicited saying, no, you're not doing it right. And that one of the basic tenets of doing no harm is to respect that others know best for themselves, provided they're not intentionally trying to harm other people. But the way that I think about it for myself, or the way that I remind myself to not get in that kind of critical mode, is to remind myself that I have no idea what somebody else's sole purpose is in their life. I personally believe that we come into this life, each of us, with a set purpose for what we are to do, and that purpose may or may not be similar to somebody else's. And so if each of us is trying to work out that purpose, how do I know if somebody is doing what's the best for them or not? And I think this relates back to what we were talking about last week in terms of there being no one right way. You know, there are multiple ways of actually manifesting our purpose.
Yes, I often think of in thinking of allowing others is the ageless wisdom often talks about the good, the true, and the beautiful. And I will often endeavor myself to see or witness or experience another's truth or another's goodness or another's beauty, even despite sometimes them not showing that, but know that inherent to them there is a truth, a goodness, and a beauty. And the ageless wisdom talks about that even in a universal sense. And so we can commit ourselves to this idea of truth and learning about the world we live in. What are these fundamental laws and principles that govern the universe? And they can help us establish, in a way, an alignment to I find it helps even write our moral compass. And we talked about a number of those principles: interconnectedness and interdependence and participation. I find that when you really come to understand the truths about the world we live in, it helps you align yourself with other people's truths. And this idea of goodness, that endeavoring yourself, to respect and other human beings and find ways to promote human rights. And it can even be just somebody's right to not receive your judgment or criticism. That allows their goodness to come forward. And again, with beauty is just really taking the time to appreciate and have gratitude for what you've got, for what the world offers you, for the potentiality and the possibilities. Just having a reverence for what another person is contributing. All of that, I think, is related to the joy aspect that you were talking about in those three characteristics. That when you align yourself to that idea of truth and goodness and beauty, it generates a sense of joy in your life, is what I have experienced, and in allowing for other people to be just who they are.
Well, and also, I think part of supporting other people is curiosity about why they're doing their lives the way they are. And maybe there's something that they want to talk about. Maybe they're just fine with how they are. I think, again, just sharing a personal anecdote, Steve, as I've mentioned before, I grew up primarily in India, and I remember a conversation that between an Indian friend of mine and somebody that was just visiting from North America. And the North American was being critical of the fact that the Indian was eating with her fingers and her hands. And my Indian friend said, "I know how clean my hands are. I have no idea how clean the silverware is."
Beautiful.
Very different perspective, right?
Yes.
So that curiosity can lead us in very interesting paths, and understand, how we can be most supportive of others. What's really important to them.
And Dorothy, what I'm so smiling at that response, because what comes through is truth, right? Mm-hmm. And goodness, which is I'm looking out for myself, and I've got certain standards, and the beauty of this person's wisdom and awareness. So right there, mm-hmm. Truth, goodness, and beauty. I love that. Made me smile. And you would hope that the person that is receiving that, there is where it is so important to allow others to serve, allow others to be who they are, for their truth and goodness and beauty to come through. You would hope that person received that and didn't respond with, further judgment or criticism, but allowed the truth to be revealed and smile as I did.
Well, I think also the whole idea of supporting others can be linked back to another concept that we've talked about on this show, and that is those 4 gates. And maybe you can help me remember those, Steve. But when we're speaking, and I think when we're thinking as well.
Yeah, is it kind?
Speech. Is it kind? Is it necessary?
And is it true?
Is it true? And does it enhance the silence? In other words, is it anything better than silence?
Than not saying anything at all, right? Does it actually contribute? And that is so important, which is knowing when to allow for space, when to allow for something. And we were talking about that at the end of the last show, which is letting something settle. I think sometimes we get so enamored with will, with doing. And sometimes we have to remind ourselves that sometimes things are better left just to be, to settle, to allow a moment to have its roots, and that's a form of will itself, is not reacting, not responding, and knowing when to be silent is actually a very particular use of the will, more internal than external. Yeah. Dorothy, we're already at a break. Before we get back into another cycle of conversation, why don't we go to some messages and continue the conversation after these words?
Hi, this is Laura Richer, host of On the Verge Radio. Sometimes you hear encouraging messages like transform your life now, become empowered, create the life you crave, and it all seems overwhelming and you're not sure where to start. I'm here to tell you that self-improvement is not always fun and easy, but it is always worth it. The path to creating positive changes begins with releasing the things that have been holding you back. Then you can create a life that inspires you. I know this because I've done it. You can find out more about what I do by visiting my website, seattlehealinghypnosis.com. I look forward to supporting you on your journey.
Stay juicy. Tune in to Your Juicy Love with me, Una Drake, co-hosting monthly with Dr. Pat, and every second Monday at 12 p.m. on Transformation Talk Radio. My show, Your Juicy Love, helps you find the dynamic, life-affirming love you've always wanted. Transform your relationships and bring peace, joy, and juicy, juicy love to planet Earth. For more information, visit unadrake.com.
Welcome back, listeners. We are going to continue the conversation on the moral compass, on will, energy, and ethics. Dorothy, would you like to pick up where we left off?
Yes, Steve, we were talking about supporting others in behaving the way that they felt was best, and you had mentioned the difference between just being, and doing, and that's actually a dimension along which cultures differ. In North America, we put a great deal of emphasis on doing, but there are other cultures that put more emphasis on being. And just as an illustration of the importance of that, and I'm sure people can think of many examples in their own life, but I had as a child, I had lived in China for 2 years, and then I went back as an adult. And one of the very meaningful experiences that I had was that I had a Chinese student that in one of my classes who contacted his mother and asked if she would be willing to meet me when I went to Beijing. And she very graciously said yes. And I ended up, during the summer that I was in Beijing, spending time in her apartment and with the rest of the family, at least one day a week. And it, very rich, very wonderful, lots of interesting things happened. And then we came to the end of the summer, and I was very aware that for a variety of reasons, political and personal, it was unlikely that we would meet again. And this had been a very important period and a very important relationship. And that last night, I went over for dinner again, as I had before. And I was keenly aware that we spent about 3 hours just being together. People were doing little things around the house, or that needed to be done. But basically, we were just being together and experiencing each other and remembering the friendships that we had. And even though we were coming from very different cultures, we had very different next steps that we were going to be taking. The treasure of having that time of just being together. So that's what came to my mind when you were talking about that. I wanted to share that.
Very nice. And what's coming up for me in hearing that is reverence, is just having reverence for another human being. And we generate that by just going a little deeper into the experience to allow it to unfold and be present with it so that we can receive the depth of it. If we're always quickly moving on to the next thing, which, as you said, America is very much of a doing, and we're often criticized as being a young country, a bit of a teenager that doesn't have a lot of worldly wisdom or a lot of, time under their belt. And it's because, indeed, we constantly want to react very quickly. We see doing as a good thing. I think it's why people enjoy the silent retreats here at Spirit Fire so much. It's interesting that I brought that forward when we were talking about organizations. And what people will say so much is that, and what I will notice in observing, is that people learn to be with each other with their presence and with their energy, and not with the stories they're telling, or not with constantly going back and forth like a tennis match with stories and sort of outdoing each other with words, but just being with each other's presence. And so many people that say, I don't think I could do a silent retreat, they're feeling into their will that is constantly wanting to act, constantly wanting to talk, constantly wanting to just jump into a situation with doing. And they can sense that, wow, I don't know if I could do that. And what's interesting is it takes great willpower to just simply be. It shows great willpower for both of you in your story that you chose, to take this time to simply be together. So there's, again, so much to the will that can be channeled as an internal force and not necessarily an external force that will result in an action.
And I think this is a critical point for us to spend a little bit of time on, Steve, that there are times when it is important not to act, and that it takes the willpower, as you mentioned, to keep ourselves from acting. And sometimes, one scenario is when it's a complex situation and we don't actually understand all of the dynamics at play. We need to push the pause button and just observe, get input until we do understand what all of the ramifications are before we choose a course of action.
Well, there's a wonderful story, a long story that I would love to take the time to read on air, but I don't have the time. It's a Ram Dass story, and it's told quite often, where he's on a train and a drunken man comes on, and he's been learning Taekwondo, and this gentleman is really unruly. He's huge and massive and really smelling of alcohol, and he's like, there's really the potential for people to be in danger, and there's young children on the train, and he gets really ready to meet this gentleman's force with an equal force. He was always told that you never use this martial art as a way to combat, you use it for resolution. But he sees this as, it's necessary. I'm going to go in there, and just as he's about to dive on this man, this old elder comes in and says, "Hey, you what you doing there? And I love what you drinking." And he says, "I'm drinking sake." And he says, "I love sake." And it's this softness. He comes at it with a non-doing, but he's aligned to his intention of this resolution of this gentleman not harming anybody. So again, it's that alignment to what's my intention and what would I like to see happen. The will is applied there, and not in matching this gentleman's sort of violent aggression with more violence or a force that you see that would tackle it. You'd just be adding to it. It's the Einstein, you can never solve a problem from the level of energy in which it was created. And so in going at this guy with martial arts was just going to create havoc, and people probably would have gotten hurt, especially those two. But this gentleman comes at it so softly, and with his willpower is used internally as alignment with bringing resolution, and he talks the gentleman down, and at the end of the story, the gentleman's laying on his lap, but just crying and releasing, and what was necessary is he just needed to be loved. So not to act, like not to add more. We sometimes just want to throw fire or throw gasoline on the fire, where really what we're trying to do, as we talked about last week, is break down something older that's not useful or not working and replace it with something new, with a higher vibration. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great example. Also, sometimes intervening actually disempowers or undermines the other person. If somebody, just taking a very simple example, if I'm in a meeting and there's a discussion and I get this great idea of what could happen, and the person who's responsible for the initiative is about to speak, and I jump in and give my idea, what I'm doing is I'm undermining the person who's actually in charge, who's actually going to be responsible, instead of waiting and listening and then seeing how I can support what that person brings forward.
Yeah, again, we have to beware, because sometimes free will comes, it somehow feels linked to the personality, don't you think? Like our personality can use it, this me, mine, me, when it feels like it's the first tool we're going to grab to make it about me, is using that will energy. And sometimes we need to use the will to, expand and include or remember the greater good. It's this idea of using will to create more space or broader boundaries, to be more inclusive, as opposed to what I want to see happen. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And we're really, what we're doing then is we're applying the will internally, right?
Yeah.
And I think that distinction, is so helpful, that we can apply the will externally, and we need to apply it internally in order to monitor our own behavior and keep ourselves from acting when it would not be appropriate to act.
And you really can feel that, huh, Dorothy? When I know we've both been in situations where we've done that. Probably you more than me. I tend to be a bit more of a spitfire sometimes. I learn the hard way. But when I actually do really restrain myself and you apply that will internally, wow, do you really get a sense and a really the experience of that force, of that power is quite magnificent as an experience,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
just as much as it is to just bang through something. What I find interesting as well, which has worked with me, is it's the solar, our gut, our enteric nervous system is often a good way to guide us as to what is going to be helpful in this situation or what is not. Am I okay with where I am? Am I aligned? We call it our gut feelings. Can I stomach a situation? And it's interesting that in terms of the chakra system, the subtle energy systems, that the solar plexus, which is also our stomach and our digestive system, what we take in and how do we assimilate a situation? What choices do we make? It's the center for our personal empowerment. So there's that word power. So I think we can all sort of learn to use our gut and our instincts as to, this situation is not quite right. Perhaps I need to pause a moment until I really have an understanding of what's going on here, and I can make the best decision for myself and for everybody, for the situation, using your gut. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's also, I think we can link this back to, we were talking earlier about addictions, the whole use of the will to stop ourselves from doing something that we know is not in our best interest.
Yes.
That whole, whether it's by reframing or substituting thoughts, substituting actions, but being able to manage our own being by the use of the will to stop behaviors that are harmful.
Well, and talk about ensuring a positive ending. We talked about that last week, of letting the goodness of a choice settle in. I made the mistake of opening a box of sugar cookies last night. I did not use my willpower, and I felt miserable this morning, just miserable. My gut told me don't do it, but my desire nature said, I want some cookies. I've worked hard all day. And, it's when you choose not, it's so simplistic, the sugar cookie, but not to do it. It's then to sit back and actually allow that choice to settle in, that will then create a habit, that will ensure that the next time you're that much stronger when the box of sugar cookies is unopened in front of you, to say, oh, that really felt good to make the choice not to eat them, even better than just having the regret of feeling lousy the next morning. When you use the will in that way, you really feel the goodness behind that choice, and letting that settle into, yes, that's creating something new. Dorothy, we're already at a break. Hold that thought.
Okay.
We'll come right back to it after these words.
Are you ready to start winning at the game of life? Lynn Brown, host of Get Into It, Winning at the Game of Life, is here to help you reach places and goals that you never thought possible. Lynn is an intuitive healer with a specialized background in financial healing. She combines her intuitive nature and her wholesome approach to financial planning. To learn more about her financial planning services, contact her personally at intuit.com.
Ignite your inner magic on Grow Your Soul Radio with Jane Matanga. Tune in each month on Transformation Talk Radio as host Jane Matanga explores how to overcome your fears to help you gain the inspiration you need to awaken your path to joy. Learn the way to life mastery and the enlightened path with Grow Your Soul Radio. For more information on Jane Matanga and her work, visit enlightened-path.com.
Welcome back, listeners. Dorothy, I could tell you were about to say something just before the break, so would you like to pick it up?
Sure. You gave the example, Steve, of the sugar cookies, and I think, at least for me, it can be easy to get into a mindset of entitlement. Well, I'm entitled to do this. I
had a long
day. Why should I stop myself?
Yeah, yeah.
And I think it's important, to remember that that the use of the will is about choice. It's not about doing. If we think of it in terms of doing, then the willful thing to do is to have the cookies.
Right.
If we think of it in terms of choice, the willful thing to do is to consider the options and what the likely consequences are going to be, and then make a choice based on that.
Yes, and that's why I was saying that so often, if the personality is really running the show, which is about me, mine, I can I can have a cookie because I had a really long day, and not considering the whole, well, I've actually got a bloodstream and I've got, muscles and tendons that I'm going to be achy tomorrow, and I'm going to, to really consider the whole, and to say, it could feel good to, could be wise to restrain myself. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Didn't happen in that case. May I have more willpower the next time there's a box of unopened sugar cookies?
Well, may you take time to make a choice, is what I would say.
Yes, and to see all the options. Correct.
Yes.
Yes.
So you mentioned earlier, I mentioned, the initiative on inclusive social action, and it's very clearly linked to will energy. It's how we focus our will. Do we recognize that we have a responsibility to say no, to say this is not okay, instead of just remaining silent, feeling helpless, but actually speaking up. And I was thinking, Steve, that there are kind of three roles in terms of how we use will energy in relation to inclusive social action. One is to prevent harm from occurring. So before anything is set in motion, we take a stand and say, if you go down that road, it is not okay. No, we will not. And people demonstrate. They sign petitions. They do a number of things to try to prevent something from even starting. Then, if it's already gotten started, then we can use willpower to resist what is happening, to say no further. It's so you've gotten a toehold, but we're going to keep you there. We're not going to let this progress any further than that. And then finally, if it's progressing, we can advocate. We can stand with those that are being harmed, and say, I am going to stand for compassion, stand for right action. And there was a news article a couple of weeks ago that caught my eye along this line that I thought was so interesting. There was, in a Texas school, there was a young child that was being bullied. She had a kind of pixie haircut, and kids were bullying her and laughing at her because of her appearance and her hair. And what the teacher decided to do, the teacher apparently had very long hair, is she cut her own hair into the same pixie style in order to stand with the child and say, it's fine to look this way.
Beautiful.
I thought it was so interesting.
It's lovely, lovely.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about inclusivity, right?
Right.
And showing others that, setting that as an example. That word always comes to the forefront when, you've really, in those three words being together, there's something so powerful in that word inclusive and inclusivity, that a move just like that shows and illustrates the ways in which we can make a choice to connect ourselves in a way that is so obvious and beyond the fact that we're all interconnected, but that shows it so clearly and says, we're in this together, and creates such goodness around that leads by example, that shows that to others. It's really that's lovely.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think one of the challenging pieces is to really feel into the fact that we are all interconnected. We know that if we go back to the principles that we talked about earlier this year or last year, the physicists have shown us that energetically we are all interconnected on some level. However, whether it's kind of a whisper of energy or lots of energy, whatever you do affects everyone. It affects how life is going to move forward. It is a particular option in the many probabilities of the ways in which our lives are going to play out. So that means that people whose beliefs or actions I may abhor are actually related to me in some way. I can't just say, no, I'm going to disown them, because we are energetically linked. So we have to have a way of saying no that recognizes that interconnectivity, that stops the harm while allowing the possibility of redemption, of people realizing that this is actually not okay. We can't change the other person, but we can model different behavior and influence them in that kind of way.
Well, and may it be so that saying no not only sends ripples out that this is not correct, that I am actually creating a boundary here that says no. I will hold this space for truth or goodness or respect or righteousness, or goodwill. But that in that saying no, it's also creating an alignment. It's also helping to stabilize one's own goodness and one's own alignment. It's like you say with the cookies, of realizing you have choices and then making the choice that is for the greater good or the holistic good. So may it be so that it does two things at once, that it not only has that outward, says I'm making a choice and my choice is this, my choice is for the greater good or the good of the whole, or it is for goodwill. But in doing that, it not only rights our compass, but that it keeps us sturdy in our alignment. I think both of those things are happening. That's what will is doing. It's really maintaining that alignment to our own truth and these intentions. So may it be so.
Well, and we can think of examples that are in the national awareness. If we go back to the early period of the Trump presidency, and Sally Yates going to the White House and saying, your staffing choice is not acceptable. Your staffing choice will put the country in danger. And that was the moral thing to do. That was the ethical thing to do. That was the standing up against power. And the thing we have to remember is we can't necessarily expect a positive outcome, because we don't control what the other person's going to do. So she got fired.
Yeah.
But it was important that she went and took that stand.
Yeah.
And I don't know her personally, but if it was me in that situation, how would I live with myself if I had not done that?
Yes. And as you say, that choice is out there. Once you make a choice, you say those words, those thought forms are there, and then others have access to them, as an alignment with their own choices, and that can give them strength, and may it be so that that the goodwill prevails. Dorothy, we've got to wrap it up. We are at the end of the show.
Oh my goodness! Okay.
Yes. Went very fast, eh? So, listeners, it's been a wonderful month. Dorothy, is there anything you'd like to just, a 10-second little wrap up?
Well, I think remembering that we're all evolving and learning, and to be curious about why someone would take a different position than yourself.
And so much power in restraint.
Yes.
Restraint in the word no when necessary, and in internal restraint when necessary. Well, listeners, we will be with you again next week, and we'll start a brand new month. So I look forward to it. Dorothy, thank you so much for all you do, and for the School for Esoteric Studies for this wonderful collaboration. And we'll be back with you next week.
Thank you for listening to Spirit Fire Radio. Tune in each Wednesday at 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 noon Eastern for your weekly guide to purposeful living and practical spirituality. Join hosts Steve Kramer and Dorothy Riddle as they shine the light on universal spiritual principles and uncover ways that ageless wisdom can guide you in cultivating consciousness in your everyday life. Add to your awareness with Spirit Fire Radio. To learn more, visit spiritfireradio.com.